Puts the work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
Over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. The punter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown most likely.
Looks right, fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel.
And welcome back to an episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We host Ben Blessington and Michael Nania, another head coaching candidate profile. This time, bit of a surprise with this one, Michael. Saints defensive backs coach Aaron Glenn, obviously Jets fans would be familiar with the name. Michael, when you first read that the Jets were bringing him in for an interview, what were your thoughts? I mean, I think I was a little surprised. Obviously, it's intriguing because I guess it shows that Joe Douglas is looking under every single rock to find the next head coach of the New York Jets.
Yeah, it was definitely a big surprise and certainly the most surprising of the candidates we've heard so far mostly because, we're mostly looking at defense coordinators, offense coordinators, college head coaches, guys who are at that level where they're either already a head coach or one step away. So position coaches are always a surprise, but he is a big name in Jets history. Not that I'm too familiar with him because he played most of his time with the Jets before I existed. So I'm not familiar with him as much as other Jets fans might be in that way, but I still know who he is. Obviously he had a great Jets career, but it's definitely a surprising one. So I'm interested to see how this plays out and maybe if they consider him for a defensive coordinator job.
Right. That was what I was going to say, is that they do this a lot with interviews. And I think the Jets did it the last time that they were doing interviews with Todd Monken and Adam Gase, where they interview for a head coaching spot, but really in their mind, it might be, well, maybe we could pair this guy as the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator. Generally, and I think Joe Douglas has given the impression that he's going to let the head coach pick his staff. So that might be a little interesting, but clearly his ties to the organization. If the Jets were to go with the college guy or somebody who didn't really have as many connections, Glenn would be a hell of a defensive coordinator. He's had a lot of success with the Saints. So as we've done with all these candidate profiles, we bring on somebody who knows a hell of a lot more than we do. This time for the Saints, John Hendrix from Saints News. John, how you doing, man? Thanks so much for taking time out of your day.
I appreciate you guys having me. As always, appreciate the time and thoughts, all that good stuff. Hope everything's going well. And obviously, it's a little bit crazy if you're a Jets fan, right?
Yeah, we have a lot more time on our hand than you do. You're busy covering a playoff game against the Bears for this weekend, and we have been doing a ton of these head coaching candidate profiles. And Glenn is a guy that I don't think we expect. Actually, when Michael and I were planning all these, we literally tried to think of every single conceivable candidate. So I was going through every single article we could find, and Glenn did come up, and we were like, no, they wouldn't hire him as head coach. And then all of a sudden the next week it's, oh, he's getting an interview. Okay. But I certainly don't hate it. I think it just shows, as I said, that the Jets are looking at every conceivable candidate, which is good. So I guess just talk about his role in the team. Obviously, he's the defensive backs coach, but is he involved in any play calling or designing the scheme or game plan? I mean, what do you know about Aaron Glenn's role with the Saints and the success that those defensive backs have had?
Yeah, look, I mean, first and foremost, so I would kind of agree. I think a hot name that probably should come up as Dan Campbell from the Saints. He's one of the assistant coaches and such. He would be somebody that I thought would have got some looks and stuff like that. But, it is what it is right now. But speaking of Glenn, he joined the team in 2016. He kind of helped with this whole rebuild for the Saints because, we had Rob Ryan in there, and Ryan was good for a little bit, and then he just kind of wasn't. And, Dennis Allen kind of gets the reins here, and he came on as a senior defensive assistant, and Ryan gets the boot, and here comes Allen, and Glenn's one of those pieces they picked up in 2016. Look, he's a very straightforward, nonsense BS type guy, right? And you look at some of the secondary guys that they've developed under him. He's a very fiery, passionate player, or he was a fiery, passionate player, fiery, passionate coach too. And look, he's garnered interest from a lot of teams already. 2018. He interviewed for the Patriots defensive coordinator spot. He's done good jobs with guys like Ken Crawley, undrafted guy, Devontae Harrison, undrafted guy, Grant Haley, who really wowed a lot of people against the Panthers in the season finale. He was a guy that they picked up on the practice squad. So, he's somebody that, I'm surprised as you for a head coaching spot. The team had blocked the Bengals from interviewing Glenn last year and back in 2019 when there was an opening, and the Giants, were interested in him in 2020 wanted to give him like a larger role, if you will. And so again, I think he might have his eyes on a bigger prize, and I don't know if it's a head coach position or he's just waiting for the right situation. But look, he's more than capable. He's very young. He's very smart. He's very direct. And look, I think he's somebody that could be a good sleeper candidate with the development, but I don't know necessarily about head coaching. But hey, I've seen crazier things with colleges and all these other things.
Yeah, I mean, he would certainly be a risk, but a lot of times when they have these under the radar guys come out of nowhere, I feel like those hires generally end up working out because it means they really had to impress in the interview. And I have no doubt that Aaron Glenn could one day be a head coach. It's surprising though that it's going to happen this soon. You mentioned a guy in Dan Campbell who actually back in 2018 became one of my top candidates. The more I read about him, a Parcells disciple, a guy who is really grown under Sean Payton the last few years. And the Jets keep talking about the CEO candidate. I'm like, a guy like Dan Campbell, 6'6", former tight end, big booming voice and a natural leader. And you hear about and he was an interim head coach of the Dolphins. I think they went 5-7 and a really bad team. So he has some head coaching experience. That was a guy that I still wouldn't be surprised if he got some interview calls maybe from the Jets or another team. But I agree with you. I think he's probably the most qualified guy on that staff. Not to mention Dennis Allen is a former head coach himself. But Glenn, certainly an interesting candidate. The Saints defensive backs specifically, though, they led the league or they tied for the league lead with 84 pass deflections and ranked third in pass defensive DVOA this season. I guess just talk about the Saints secondary style of play from both a schematic standpoint and a mentality standpoint. And I guess just the effect that Aaron Glenn has on them.
Yeah, look, I'd say first and foremost, I coming into this season, I thought this was a top 10 defense with a top 5 ceiling. And, that first game against Tampa with Tom Brady and everything, that's kind of what we were expecting a little bit there. Right. And so they regressed. They didn't look good against the Raiders this following week. And they really got lit up by Aaron Rodgers, even though it was a 7-point game in that one. And, there was a lot of problems in the secondary with communication. And obviously, one of the big things was, Von Bell left free agency to go to Cincinnati, and the team had brought actually Malcolm Jenkins back. And Jenkins is a veteran guy. He knows a lot. Obviously, he's won a couple Super Bowls and such. So, super important. But, the biggest thing I think I've seen is, Marcus Williams is a guy who everybody knows his name and thinks, oh, Minneapolis Miracle. But this is a player who knows his weaknesses. And I think this is where Glenn comes in. He knows with his players that there's no secret about where they need to get better, right? And Marcus Williams is a guy who said it going into the offseason, going into this season, I got to get better on my tackling. And I think he's only missed like 2 tackles this season. And I think that's a credit to his work ethic and B, a credit to what Glenn brings to the table. I think they also bring in the right players. Marshawn Lattimore was good. I mean, this is a team that made Eli Apple look pretty good for all intents and purposes after trading for him from the Giants. And Janoris Jenkins comes in and look, they're very complimentary about what they do. Is he's not afraid to get in people's face and tell it like it is. And you watch during training camp, obviously it wasn't able to see much here, but him and Curtis Johnson, the wide receivers coach, I mean, they get pretty animated with each other because they always preach, being as aggressive as possible. And Glenn obviously was a good defensive back in the league. And for him, it was just more along the lines of putting people into place. They've got good talent too. So CJ Gardner-Johnson it really, as a rookie was great. And in his second year, Saints roll a lot of nickel coverage where they'll, leave Demario Davis and it was Quan Alexander, but now Alex Anzalone. But, they put guys like CJ Gardner-Johnson in the slot. And, for the life of me, it's crazy to see how this guy's draft stock fell just because maybe he just gets in trouble or has a little bit extra to him. Right. And so Glenn's done it with, your starters, but it's also the depth too. It's guys like Patrick Robinson coming in here looking good again. DJ Swearinger, a veteran player in this league, but he's done it with a lot of different players, different types of situations. And ultimately, Dennis Allen runs the defense, but it doesn't work if you don't have Aaron Glenn working his magic. And I think one of the best things is their ability to make adjustments in the game is really where they shine.
Yeah, and you mentioned Gardner Johnson, one of the best examples of very good young defensive backs that they've developed there in recent years. So, in addition to him, who do you think are some of the best examples of young players in that secondary who have developed under Glenn's leadership in the past few years?
Yeah, I think you got to look at Marshawn Lattimore first of all. I mean, I know he's a first round guy, but look, we've seen first round defensive backs that just, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they look like crap, right? And they
Yeah.
can't figure it out. They struggle. They don't grade out well. Lattimore is a guy who's just really, I mean, he's had some injuries in his career and he's had some different things, but obviously he's a good one. King Crawley was a guy that was undrafted in 2017, and he was put in a situation where he ended up being a starter opposite Lattimore and stuff. And he really kind of embraced his role and he looked fantastic. And, I think one of the best things I could tell you about somebody, because Crawley had bounced around a couple of teams and he ended up back with New Orleans, but specifically one of the problems he had an issue with was his ball location. And, when you looked at that Panthers game, he played one single snap and he was able to do everything. And it's like, it's one of those plays where he turns his head, he's in position, he makes the pick. And we're thinking to ourselves, man, if this guy would have just done this while he was here, he probably would have still had a starting job and they wouldn't have had to trade for Eli Apple and all these other things. And again, I think Apple had a pretty good resurgence here. Under Glenn, they've had other guys that, primarily play special teams like Justin Hardy, and Arthur Millette is a guy who spent some time here with the Saints too. Obviously, Jets fans know him, but he was one that I wish they wouldn't have let got away. I really like him a lot, and I just think he had so much to offer other teams and for this team. But it's just when it's a crowded room like that, you got to move on, and you can't keep everybody, right? But I think that's just a few examples. And in the secondary, Marcus Williams is probably the best example. I mean, this guy has just really lit the world on fire. Von Bell looked really good, and we knew he was going to get paid. And obviously, he's done some good things for Cincinnati.
And I think from a fan perspective, or at least anyone who's looking at head coaching candidates who doesn't know too much about them yet, one of the first things you'll do is, search the internet and see what players have said about them, fellow coaches. Look for the best quotes and stories you can on them. So in terms of Glenn, what are some of the best things that players who have played under him in that secondary have said about his coaching style, the effect he's had on them? What are some of the best quotes and things that we've heard from players about Glenn and his coaching?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of them just talked about the accountability is the biggest thing, and it's about what he brings to the table as far as the discipline. And I think for Glenn, it's a lot of complimentary things, and it's one of the things where you hear common themes of saying, he just makes me better. He continually challenges me to do what I need to do and get better. He holds him accountable. And again, it sounds so easy, right? Because that's what you want in a nutshell. But you get personas in there, you get guys that get heated, you get things that happen through the course of the game. And for Glenn specifically, I mean, this is somebody that gets praised a lot by Sean Payton for what he does. Obviously he played for the Saints for just a brief moment back when Payton was coach and stuff. So there's some familiarity there. But look, I think he has a lot of things and qualities that has really just allowed him to be in this position. And as far as his ability to go in there, again, you mentioned it he's played for guys like Bill Parcells, so he understands it. But it's his film study, his intelligence. It's those different things that have really set him apart. And he can basically, guys that are in the secondary can just gravitate to him for information. I mean, those are just some of the things that he brings to the table here.
Yeah, and it's an enormous leap to go from defensive backs coach to head coach. It's been done before. When the Jets hired Herm, he wasn't a coordinator, and there's been plenty of other guys who've been hired throughout the league. I believe Andy Reid wasn't a coordinator when he was hired. But what are, I guess, some of the positive traits that Christopher Johnson and Joe Douglas, the owner and the GM, could see in their interview with Aaron Glenn, or by just the background work that you obviously know of, that make you believe that he could be that he could make that leap to the head coaching spot?
Well, look, I think he understands the game, right? He understands the patterns. He understands what to look for. He understands a lot of what is necessary to win in this league, right? And you talk to him, you have these different conversations. he'll talk about, when you're playing man to man, that, what the quarterback is looking at and how he can fool you in, and just teaching your body movement, making sure, hey, you don't lock into this man particularly. You can look at the quarterback and, look at double moves, look at these different things, right? And again, you're going to see a lot of different things on tape. Obviously, with the secondary, it's not a perfect thing, but specifically, if I'm a GM looking for a coach, it's his influence that he brings. And I think one of the things that Sean Payton's done a fantastic job is, he said it just the other week that his players keep him young, and obviously he has a lot of fun in that locker room. And it's good when you're winning. It's good when you have these players that pretty much, in all fairness, would take a bullet for you. And Glenn's a huge part of that. And he's just got that. It's like a standard of excellence, if you will, that I believe he would hold people accountable to. He understands, what type of mentorship, what good looks like from guys like Bill Parcells and Sean Payton. And again, you radiate that, and you give him some control, you give him some ideas, you give him some things. I mean, when we saw that the Patriots were interested in, we thought, he was gone for sure as the defensive coordinator, but, he kind of hung around, and maybe there's a chance for him here if Dennis Allen gets another head coaching look or something along that lines. I mean, it's really something, because Mike Nolan was a guy that really, I think, revitalized his career last year or in the past several years with the Saints, and obviously he got to be a DC for Dallas, and maybe that's not the best example, but I think New Orleans has been an attractive position, and you see a lot of what they've done, after going 7-9 seasons and really rebuilding this thing. And so I think with the right GM supporting the coach, which I think is the most important thing, as long as you have a great relationship there and get some say so in it, I think he would be an ideal person. And he's very well spoken, understands what it takes, and I think you could do it. I just don't know if it's that time now.
Right. And like you said, that leads right into our next question. Do you think he's ready to make that leap? There's a lot positive to say about him, which you've talked quite a bit about already. But do you think he's ready to make that leap straight to head coach right now?
Again, I would say more DC, but again, it's again one of those things where we see it across the league that, hey, we think that that's the natural progression, is go from DC to maybe assistant coach to head coach. But I'll never understand what most teams are looking for in terms of how they want to go and approach it. And maybe
especially
he is
the
a
Jets.
Wild card. And maybe
we haven't gotten to understand them after watching them for about 20 years. We have no idea what they're doing all the time.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned. I've watched football for a long time, and I remember the days when they brought in Rich Kotite, and I remember how much of a dumpster fire that was and stuff. And it's just, But anyways, I digress.
Glenn played for Kotite, so maybe he can bring some of his genius, and if he gets the head coaching job.
That is the last person who probably won genius from if you were doing the Jets. But again, it's I think it's a thought, a notion that Glenn would be able to. I don't know if he's ready yet. I don't feel like it. But then again, some of these coaches that have been promoted, they clearly weren't ready, right? So I think with the right support system and the right things, he can be in that guy and he can do it. But that's a lot of responsibility to make that leap right now.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But look, I think the story with Andy Reid was because I believe he was the Packers quarterbacks coach, and then the Eagles were trying to find somebody who's super detail oriented or whatever. And he showed up to the interview with just a complete binder, like a 4-inch binder or whatever, how he would run the team or whatever. And the Eagles were obviously impressed and they hired him. If Glenn has an interview like that, if he knocks out of the park, I don't think it would be too big of a surprise. And I think the fans can get behind a guy who clearly had success here as a player. But I agree. I think he's a very promising defensive coordinator candidate. And I think he will be a head coach, within the next decade. But I think it's maybe even sooner, probably sooner. But I think it's probably too soon to have him as a head coach. But as a defensive coordinator, I mean, how do you think he would be? What would be intriguing? What do you think his philosophy would be? Just kind of talk about Aaron Glenn as a potential defensive coordinator, because if the Jets were to hire a guy, just throwing this out there, like a guy like Matt Campbell, who probably has a guy in mind for defensive coordinator, but let's just say for all intents and purposes, he doesn't, or maybe he likes Aaron Glenn or whatever the case may be. Maybe the Jets are back to meddling like they did with Matt Rule, but let's say they could pair a guy like that with Aaron Glenn. What are the Jets getting in Aaron Glenn as the defensive coordinator?
Well, would say this. I don't know. You'll see signs of improvement for him to start, right? I don't know if it's going to be a perfect product and he's going to come in here and just set the world on fire, but you'll notice a lot of extra things, attention to detail, a lot of accountability, and I think that's ultimately what you're looking for is that you got guys that want to do their job and need to do their job and not be afraid to get in people's face. I mean, I remember great example is Dennis Allen when we had Brandon Browner here for that terrible season. And, Browner missed an assignment and he's clearly, upset. And Dennis Allen got in his face. And that was just probably one of the best moments that you could see is I think that's where you can't be as a coach to be afraid to hold your team accountable. Because I mean, we saw JJ Watt say it the other day that people are professionals. You're getting paid money. There's a lot of things that go into this. And, as a defensive coordinator, I think that's the biggest thing is you want to be accountable. You don't want to be like, well, it's just this person's fault or, it's not necessarily their fault or anything like that. Like you got so many limited chances to prove yourself on the field. And when you don't get out there and you don't deliver and you don't do your job, then, people need to hear about that. And Glenn's a guy that's going to probably hurt people's feelings. And that's okay because I think that's what Jets probably need and what anybody as a defense coordinator you need. And, there's just so many passes that you can get as some coaches do, but Glenn's a guy that you don't have to give him a couple passes. He's going to get it fixed and he's going to get it right. And I think that's probably his best attribute going into any type of situation.
Yeah, we joked about him playing under Kotite and maybe taking some of those traits, but in all seriousness, he did play under Bill Parcells, and I imagine he probably learned something from Bill. You mentioned a few buzzwords there. Do you think that would be his philosophy as a head coach, that, he's obviously going to have discipline, he's going to have accountability, he's going to get in your face? Just kind of, what do you think he would be like running a team? Would you describe him as a player's coach, even if he is getting in guys' faces and holding them accountable?
Yeah, I think so. Just because the simple fact that I think when you see what he brings and the wealth of knowledge, he's a coach you want to play for. You want to do things for. You don't want to. I mean, you've seen it. What coaches do. You just basically just don't give a crap, right? And he's a guy that's going to inspire people, and he's going to be able to get you the most from his players, whether that's defensively or as a team. And I think there's just a lot of buy-in for somebody like that. But, ultimately, I don't think any motivation things will be a problem because Sean Payton's one of the master motivators. And again, I think that's what's so appealing about a lot of these openings and looking at these Saints guys is I think a lot of them know what it takes. And he's only 48. So, I mean, there's a lot of room for him to grow. But specifically, I think that, he's just a guy that is going to be able to make an impact day one and really follow a lot of the things that, his mentors had laid before him, but inject his own unique personality and things that go into it as a coach.
And say he does get a defensive coordinator job, or if he is a head coach, running the defense that the Saints do run, if he carries some of those philosophies over, what type of players will he need to run his defense with his new team, both in terms of just the mentality standpoint, players who fit that culture, and in terms of what they do schematically, especially in the secondary? What type of players would fit in Aaron Glenn defense, do you think?
I think he likes to play a lot of man coverage. He likes to do a lot of press coverage too. So, I mean, you definitely need good corners for that, obviously, and safety help over the top, somebody who knows how to recognize and diagnose. And, again, you obviously want high football IQ players. I mean, that's a given, right, for anything. But, for him specifically in the secondary to make it work, that's some of the things the Saints have right now. And then obviously a good pass rush, I mean, you can sit here and say, well, a good pass rush makes the secondary looks good, or, good secondary in the pass rush. You can go back and forth on those types of things. But, ultimately, I think one of the biggest changes and things that the Saints have had that have really helped their defense is a stout linebacker, and that's DeMario Davis. So if you can get a good guy in the middle and then get some good talent on the secondary building through the draft, whether that's free agency, and then have some good guys make the leap on pass rushing, I think those are the ideal places to start.
If only the Jets had a guy like DeMario Davis.
Yeah, you don't know what's up with that, right?
We had him twice.
Pickup ever. I'm telling you, I joke about this, but between the Jets, they've given us two amazing linebackers with Jonathan Vilma and DeMario Davis now. I mean, it's just something.
Well, when Davis was drafted, Rex Ryan compared him to Rex Ryan, and like we're talking like rookie mini camp, and he talked about him as a leader, and everybody kind of laughed at Rex. But I have to say, like Rex was Rex was right. I mean, I'm not going to say he's Ray Lewis level of player, but certainly as a leader. But DeMar is a guy that like was a really late bloomer. Like he wasn't that great. Then he ends up in the Browns, and he came back. And I think it was the 2016 season. He was actually a lot better. But then we were like, we'll go with the younger guy, Avery Williamson, not a fluke. And of course, Demario Davis is now like the best linebacker in all sports. So
Yeah, very underrated, but he won't get any Pro Bowl nods. But he grades out great in PFF, and I think he should be up for an All Pro award. But it's almost criminal that the guy just doesn't get a lot of recognition like he should.
Yeah, it's definitely, he is a great example, I think, of development, because he did have a great season with the Jets in 2017, but he was up there in age, and so it was sort of an outlier season, but he went over to New Orleans and he's maintained it, obviously. And, to be able to have that development, you need a great staff. So if Aaron Glenn does become a head coach, what do you think his staff could look like? And just in general, because obviously the head coach leap is something we're not expecting, but who are some assistants on that Saints staff that we should be looking out for to potentially get new jobs, whether it be with the Jets or elsewhere? So just who are some of the other assistants on that Saints staff we should look out for? And if Glenn does make that head coach leap, who do you think are some of the coaches over there that could follow him on his staff?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously Dan Campbell is one of the first ones to look at. Pete Carmichael is obviously another one to think. He's been the offensive coordinator for the Saints, kind of like the brains of the operation for a long time. And look, I think he's done a fantastic job. And I don't know if he's ready or he wants to move on, but somebody that, to look at. They have some good ones, right? And I think from defensive side of the ball, Michael Hodges took over for Mike Nolan as the linebackers coach. He's done a fantastic job. Ryan Nielsen's their defensive line coach. I mean, this guy's done some great things for the Saints. I mean, they haven't had a pass rush performance less than 42 sacks in the past 4 years. So again, I think those are some names to potentially watch. There's a lot of other guys. Dennis Allen's obviously one of the top guys, but it's not just that, but even their front office personnel, guys like Terry Fontenot, Jeff Ireland, those two are getting some looks, and I think they should be GMs. And, that could be an interesting thing if the Jets get on that train and they bring in somebody like Glenn and have a GM like Fontenot or Ireland that would support them accordingly. But, there's a lot of guys on this roster and on this coaching staff that can help a lot of other teams. And hopefully they flourish. That's the point.
right. And bringing it full circle back to Aaron Glenn. If you're Aaron Glenn's agent and you're on the phone with Joe Douglas, you're negotiating a contract, or maybe you're just talking to Jets fans. I mean, what would be your pitch for Aaron Glenn as a head coach? I think we all kind of agree it would be too early, but that doesn't mean it couldn't work. I mean, that doesn't mean if he, as we said, if he hits that interview out of the park, I mean, I think the Jets are going to make that hire, or at least strongly consider it. What would be your pitch for Aaron Glenn as a head coach?
I think for him, it's the world's your oyster, right? I think there's some good pieces there. I think Marcus May is somebody that you can potentially, bring in and you have him to work alongside you. I mean, there's promise there. There's guys that can do things defensively on that team. There's some things they just need the right leader, right? It's just what I feel like. And whether Sam Darnold's the guy or not, I mean, that's a story for another, or question for another thing. But look, I think there's a lot of quarterbacks that are going to be available, right? There's the Wentz talk. There's Matt Ryan potentially. There's Cam Newton. There's Matt Stafford. So there are ways for the Jets organization, as long as they can be in a position to be players in free agency, to be able to draft well. I think that's the way you sell it. Is, look, we're going to commit to doing X, Y, Z, and you're our guy to help us get where we need to go.
Well, John, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us. Let our listeners know where they can follow you. I think we're heading into the playoffs. A lot of Jets fans, at least the last decade or so, have had to choose a playoff team to root for. Maybe it'll be the Saints. So where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so if you go on Saints News on Facebook and Twitter, and obviously si.com/NFL/Saints, we're the team site for New Orleans. And On Twitter, I'm John J. Hendrix. Hendrix, just like Jimmy, for those who can catch the reference. It doesn't always work these days. I don't know what's going on with America, but that's a different question too in itself. But but at any rate, so there's just follow us on there, and again, I love to interact with fans. Jets, I've got a pretty interesting history, like just a good appreciation for guys like Neil O'Donnell or the other places.
Or Aaron Glenn.
Date myself. Aaron Glenn, yeah, he's one of them, obviously, but even guys like Blair Thomas or
right,
all those guys just going down the list. They're an interesting team, so hopefully they can turn it around because somebody else needs to challenge and put the Patriots at the bottom of the division in this day.
Well, I mean, I think the Bills have done that at least for now, but we'll see if who can be the long-term successor. And the Saints are actually a good model for the Jets in the sense that, lovable losers that turn into competent winning franchise. One can only hope that the Jets can one day be as competent as the Saints have been the last decade or so. John, thanks again for coming on the show. Aaron Glenn, ladies and gentlemen, tweet us at CYJ Pod, your thoughts on Aaron Glenn as a potential head coach or as a potential defensive coordinator. You can follow myself at Ben W. Blessington, Michael at Michael_Nania. You can listen to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify. Find us at jetsxfactor.com. Aaron Glenn.
Touchdown, most likely.
Looks right, fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.